In the modern era, we are suffering from a collective allergy to stillness. We live in an age of hyperconnectivity where the average person is never more than an arm's length away from a digital crowd. We have become experts at staying in touch, but have become total strangers to our own minds. This is why most people fail at the art of being alone. They mistake solitude for a vacuum, a terrifying empty space that must be plugged with the white noise of social media, podcasts, or mindless chatter. To the unprepared mind, silence is a mirror, and most people are terrified of what that mirror reflects. The Stoic philosophers, however, viewed solitude as the ultimate training ground for the soul. They understood that if you cannot be happy when you are alone, you're not actually happy when you are with others. You're merely distracted. Being alone is not a social failure, it is a spiritual necessity. Seneca once remarked that solitude and company may be allowed to take turns, but he warned that the man who cannot endure himself is a man in exile. Most fail at this art because they view being alone as a passive state of waiting for someone else to arrive. To master solitude, you must treat it as an active engagement with your inner citadel. It is the process of auditing your thoughts, stripping away the performances you put on for society, and finding a sense of peace that does not depend on a like, a text, or a nod of approval. Before we dismantle the walls of your discomfort, take a moment to subscribe. Join us as we explore the Stoic path to self-mastery and learn how to turn your isolation into an indestructible fortress of the mind. The modern tragedy is that we have become a civilization of escape artists. We are remarkably skilled at fleeing from the one thing we can never truly leave behind: ourselves. Most people fail at being alone because they view solitude as a void to be filled, a terrifying hollow expanse, rather than a space to inhabit. We treat silence like a social emergency, an awkward gap in the conversation of existence that must be paved over with digital noise, frantic productivity, or superficial company. The reflex of distraction. Observe your own behaviour the next time you find yourself waiting in a line, sitting at a red light, or spending a quiet evening at home. The moment the external world stops entertaining you, a reflexive itch begins. The hand reaches for the phone with a speed that borders on the unconscious. We scroll through feeds of people we barely know, looking for information we don't need simply to avoid the weight of the present moment. This isn't just a habit, it is a flight response. According to Stoic philosophy, this constant reaching for distraction is a form of self-betrayal. We are essentially telling ourselves that our own company isn't enough, that the contents of our own minds are so dull, or perhaps so frightening, that we require a digital umbilical cord to feel alive. We have traded our sovereignty for notifications, and in doing so, we have lost the ability to stand on our own 2 feet. The FOMO fallacy. When a weekend lies empty before us, a specific type of modern anxiety takes hold: FOMO, or the fear of missing out. This is the antithesis of the Stoic concept of autarky, self-sufficiency. When we suffer from FOMO, we are operating under the false judgment that the good life is happening elsewhere, at a party we weren't invited to, in a city we aren't visiting, or in a lifestyle we haven't achieved. The Stoic master Epictetus would argue that this is a fundamental error in logic. He taught that our distress does not come from the events themselves, an empty Saturday night, but from our judgment of those events. By labeling solitude as loneliness, or missing out, we create our own suffering. We are looking for external stamps of approval to validate our existence. If no one sees us having fun, we fear we aren't actually having it. This makes us fragile. It makes our happiness a hostage to the schedules and whims of other people. The fear of the mirror. Why is silence so uncomfortable? Why do we flee into the great escape? It is because solitude acts as a merciless mirror. In the noise of the crowd, we can hide behind our roles: the employee, the friend, the parent, the jokester. But when the room goes quiet, the masks fall off. In the stillness, you're forced to confront. 1. Your unfiltered thoughts. The anxieties you've been suppressing finally have the floor. 2. Your regrets. The Stoics believed that many people avoid being alone because they are haunted by their own past actions. 3. Your mortality. Silence reminds us of the passing of time, a reality we prefer to bury under busyness. We are running away from the uncomfortable reality of who we are when no one is watching. If you find your own company unbearable, it is a diagnostic signal that there is work to be done in your inner citadel. As Seneca pointed out with cutting precision, all our troubles spring from our inability to be alone. He observed that people travel to distant lands not to see the world but to escape themselves, only to find that their heavy heart follows them across the ocean. You cannot travel away from a restless mind. The prison of restlessness. We often boast about our freedom in the modern world, yet we are more enslaved than ever. True freedom, to a Stoic, is the ability to maintain a calm and steady mind regardless of external circumstances. If you cannot sit in a room for 30 minutes without a distraction, without a screen, a book, a snack, or a song, you aren't a free agent. You're a prisoner of your own restlessness. Your phone has become your jailer. Your need for constant stimulation is a chain. When we fail at being alone, we are essentially admitting that we're not at home within ourselves. We are like a landlord who's afraid of his own house, so he spends all his time wandering the streets, looking for someone else's doorway to stand in. The cost of the escape. The cost of this constant flight is the erosion of our character. When we cannot be alone, we cannot be principled. If you are terrified of solitude, you will compromise your values just to stay in the good graces of the group. You will say things you don't mean, laugh at jokes you don't find funny, and pursue goals you don't care about, all because the alternative, standing alone, is too frightening to contemplate. Furthermore, the great escape prevents us from performing the most important Stoic duty, the evening review. The Stoics, like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, practiced the art of retreating into themselves at the end of each day to ask, what did I do well? What did I do wrong? What will I do better tomorrow? If you are constantly distracted, this self-correction never happens. You continue to make the same mistakes, driven by the same impulses, never growing, only aging. Reclaiming the space. To stop the escape, we must reframe our perspective. Solitude is not a void that needs to be filled with garbage. It is a sacred space that needs to be inhabited with intention. It is the laboratory of the soul. When you stop reaching for the phone, the initial minutes are painful. The boredom feels like a physical weight. But if you sit through it, if you refuse to flee, something miraculous happens. The dust settles. Your thoughts become clearer. You begin to realize that the scary silence is actually the only place where you can hear your own reason. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. But this retreat is only quiet if you have spent time tending to it. If you have filled your mind with junk, your retreat will be a junkyard. If you have filled it with wisdom and honest reflection, it becomes a palace." Conclusion. The ultimate test. The art of being alone is the ultimate test of your philosophy. It is easy to act like a Stoic when you're surrounded by people who admire you, or when your life is filled with entertainment. The real test is who you are in the 3 a.m. silence. If you fail at being alone, you will always be a secondary character in your own life, reacting to the world rather than acting upon it. To master the great escape, you must stop running. You must turn around, face the silence, and realize that the person standing there is not an enemy to be avoided, but a friend you have neglected for far too long. To the untrained eye, the man sitting alone on a park bench and the man sitting alone in a prison cell look identical. Physically, they occupy the same state of isolation. However, psychologically, they are worlds apart. One is experiencing solitude, while the other is suffering through loneliness. To master the art of being alone, we must navigate the profound Stoic distinction between these two states. If you do not understand this divide, you will always be a victim of your circumstances, constantly hunting for the company of others like a starving man hunts for scraps. The anatomy of loneliness, a state of lack. In the Stoic view, loneliness is not a physical condition. It is a cognitive error. It is a state of lack born from the belief that you are incomplete. When you feel lonely, you are essentially declaring that your own mind is insufficient to sustain you. You're looking at your life and seeing an empty chair, a silent phone, or an unshared bed, and you are judging those things as bad. The Stoics argued that we suffer because we place our good in things outside of our control, what they called externals. If your happiness depends on the presence of a friend, the affection of a partner, or the roar of a crowd, you have outsourced your soul. You're no longer your own master, you are a beggar. Loneliness is the hunger pang of the ego, demanding that someone else come along to tell you that you matter. It is a fragile state, because it assumes that without an audience your life has no content. Solitude, autarky. the self-sufficient ecosystem. Contrast this with the Stoic ideal of solitude or autarky. In Greek philosophy, autarky refers to self-sufficiency. This is the realization that your inner citadel, the term Marcus Aurelius used for the ruling faculty of the mind, is a complete self-sustaining ecosystem. A solitary person isn't missing anyone because they are with themselves. They understand that the mind is the only thing that is truly ours. Everything else, our friends, our family, our reputation, is on loan from the universe. When you are solitary, you're not waiting for life to begin when someone else arrives. You are already living. You're observing your thoughts, refining your character, and enjoying the sheer miracle of consciousness. As Epictetus famously said, "What is solitude? It is the condition of a helpless person. For if a man is alone, he is not therefore solitary. Any more than one in a crowd is the opposite." You can be lonely in a stadium of 50,000 people if you feel misunderstood or disconnected. Conversely, you can be perfectly solitary in a desert if you are at peace with your reason. The soldier on guard Epictetus often used the imagery of a soldier to describe the mental state required for solitude. He taught that we should be like a sentry on guard duty, always alert, vigilant of our thoughts, yet perfectly content to stand our post. A soldier doesn't need a party to perform his duty. His purpose provides all the company he requires. Most people fail at being alone because they are bad sentries. When they find themselves alone, they don't use the time to stand guard over their character. Instead, they drop their weapons and descend into a spiral of what-ifs and if-onlys. They treat their solitude as a gap in their life rather than a duty to their own development. To the Stoic, being alone is a high-level assignment. It is the time when you sharpen your mental tools so that when you do return to society, you return as a stronger, more virtuous person. The hostile neighborhood of the mind. Why do so many people fear this assignment? Why is the transition from loneliness to solitude so difficult? It is because, for most, the mind has become a hostile neighborhood. Imagine a person who has never cleaned their house. Trash is piled in the corners, the windows are grimed over, and there are strange, unsettling noises coming from the basement. Naturally, that person wouldn't want to spend a Friday night there. They would do anything to stay out late, go to a bar, or sleep at a friend's place. Anywhere but home. This is exactly how most people treat their internal lives. They haven't done the housekeeping of examining their impressions. They have decades of unaddressed anxieties, unexamined biases, and suppressed guilts. When they're forced into silence, all that trash starts to smell. The basement noises of their insecurities become deafening. The silence feels heavy because it is filled with the ghosts of things they have refused to face. They flee solitude not because they love people, but because they are afraid of the neighbor living inside their own skull. The art of mental housekeeping. To master solitude, you must begin the work of logos, the application of reason to your internal world. You must stop viewing your thoughts as facts and start viewing them as impressions. When an anxious thought arises in the silence, a Stoic doesn't run from it. They turn toward it and ask, "Is this within my control?" If the answer is no, they discard it as nothing to me. If the answer is yes, they form a plan. This is the housekeeping that turns a hostile neighborhood into a sanctuary. By constantly auditing your judgments, you clear the clutter. You realize that your anxiety isn't caused by being alone. It is caused by the stories you tell yourself about being alone. When you clean the windows of your perception, the inner citadel becomes a place of light and order. Suddenly, you aren't stuck at home. You are resting in a palace. You become the kind of person who can wait for a delayed flight or sit through a power outage without a hint of irritation, because your internal environment is so well ordered that external conditions are irrelevant. The paradox of connection. The ultimate irony is that those who master solitude are actually better at being with people. If you are lonely, you approach people with a hidden agenda. You need them to fix your boredom or validate your worth. This makes you needy, manipulative, and exhausting. But if you have mastered solitude, if you are a solitary person in the Stoic sense, you approach people with abundance. You don't need them to be anything for you, because you are already complete. This allows you to love others for who they are rather than for the gap they fill in your life. Conclusion of the exploration. Solitude is the laboratory where we test our philosophy. It is where we find out if the things we say we believe, courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom, are actually part of us, or just slogans we use to fit in. Loneliness is a prison where you are the inmate. Solitude is a fortress where you're the commander. The difference lies entirely in the housekeeping of your mind. Every journey into the self eventually reaches a point of no return. In the pursuit of solitude, this is the climax, the moment of maximum tension, where the habit of distraction meets the wall of reality. Most people live their entire lives circling this wall, never climbing it. They get close enough to feel the chill of the shadow it casts, and then they sprint back toward the warmth of the crowd. But for those who stay, for those who choose the Stoic path, this wall becomes the gateway to an entirely new dimension of existence. The wall of discomfort. The moment you decide to sit in silence, truly without a phone, a book, or a background playlist, you hit what can only be described as a wall of discomfort. It usually happens around the 5 or 10 minute mark. The initial novelty wears off, and the itch begins. Your brain, conditioned by years of dopamine loops and instant gratification, begins to panic. It demands a hit of stimulation. This discomfort isn't just boredom, it's a form of psychological withdrawal. Your thoughts begin to race. You remember an email you forgot to send. You obsess over a comment someone made 3 years ago. You feel a sudden, inexplicable urge to check the fridge. This is the great escape trying to reassert itself. Your ego is terrified of what happens if the noise stops, because when the noise stops, the mirror of the mind is finally uncovered. Most people turn back here. They convince themselves that they are just not the type of person who likes being alone, or they dismiss the exercise as pointless. But they are missing the most critical realization in human psychology. The person you are running from is the only one who can actually give you peace. The breakthrough: you are not your thoughts. If you refuse to turn back, if you sit through the twitching, the anxiety and the boredom, the discomfort eventually shifts. This is the key moment. You begin to observe your thoughts as if they were clouds passing over a mountain. In the chaos of a busy life, we believe we are our thoughts. If we have an anxious thought, we are anxious. If we have a jealous thought, we are jealous. But in the deep stillness of mastered solitude, a gap opens up. You realize that your thoughts are merely impressions, fantasia, as the Stoics called them. They are suggestions made by the brain, not commands issued to the soul. You see a thought arise, I am lonely, and for the first time you can look at it objectively and say, that is an interesting impression, but is it true? This is the moment you stop being the slave of your mind and start being its master. You realize that the hostile neighborhood was only hostile because you were judging everything in it. When you stop judging, the neighborhood becomes just a place. The Stoic formula, P = E+. To codify this breakthrough, we can look at the fundamental Stoic equation for mental fortitude, P = E+. In this formula, T represents your internal peace. E is the event, in this case the objective reality of being alone in a room. False is your response or your judgment. Most people believe that toler is determined directly by we does. They think, being alone, E, makes me sad, P. But the Stoics realized that E is neutral. Sitting in a room is neither good nor bad. It is just sitting in a room. The entire weight of your experience rests on where. If your response, is, this is boring, I'm being left out, I'm unloved, then your peace, P will be 0. You will suffer. If your response, is, this is training, this is my time to build my inner citadel, I am my own best company, then your peace, P becomes invincible. The climax of being alone is the moment you realize you hold the pen that writes the value of Paul. You're the one who decides whether the silence is a prison or a sanctum. When you change the judgment, you change the entire world. The transition, from boring to training. When you view solitude as training, askesis, the entire experience transforms. You're no longer waiting for time to pass. You are using time to strengthen your character. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations for an audience. He wrote them to himself, while on campaign in the cold, lonely forests of Germania. He was practicing the art of being alone in the most stressful environment imaginable. He used that solitude to remind himself that the universe is change, and that his only job was to maintain his integrity. When you reach this climax, you stop fearing the void. You realize that the void is actually the only place where you can do the real work. You can't perform surgery in a riot. You need a clean, quiet theatre. Your soul is the same. Solitude is the sterile environment where you can finally operate on your own character, removing the tumours of vanity, anger, and fear. True power, the freedom from being needed. The ultimate realization at the height of this experience is a radical shift in your relationship with the world. We are taught that being needed is the highest form of success. We want to be needed by our partners, our bosses, and our friends. But the Stoic climax reveals a higher truth. True power is not being needed by anyone, but being entirely comfortable with yourself. This sounds cold to the modern ear, but it is actually the foundation of the most profound kindness. When you don't need people to validate your existence, because you have already validated it in the silence, you are finally free to love them without strings attached. You don't need them to complete you, because you realized in the climax that you are already whole. You're no longer a social beggar looking for a fix of attention. You're a self-contained sun, radiating warmth because it is your nature to do so, not because you are trying to get something back. The shift in vision. As you cross this threshold, the wall of discomfort dissolves. You find that you can sit for an hour or a day and feel a sense of profound, quiet joy. It is the joy of the untroubled retreat. You realize that the great escape was actually a flight from a treasure chest. You are running away from the only source of permanent stability in a chaotic universe. The world can take your money, your health, and your reputation, but it cannot enter the space you have built in the silence. The climax ends when the mirror of the mind no longer shows you a stranger you are afraid of, but a friend you respect. You have looked into the abyss of yourself, and instead of blinking, you smiled. Being alone is not a personality trait. It is a skill that must be practiced with the same rigor as any physical craft. Most people fail at it because they lack the discipline to face their own reflection without the numbing effect of a screen. However, by embracing Stoic principles, you undergo a radical transformation. You turn solitude from a punishment into a fortress. This is the ultimate freedom. When you're no longer afraid of being alone, you're no longer a slave to the opinions or presence of others. You stop performing for an audience and start living for your principles. You finally choose your company out of desire, never out of desperation. To sustain this freedom, you must commit to 3 Stoic pillars. Own your time. A gap in your schedule is not a hole to be patched. It is an opportunity to be present. Do not let a quiet afternoon feel like a gap in your soul. Audit your mind. Use silence as a laboratory. When an uncomfortable thought arises, don't flee. Examine it, challenge its validity, and strip it of its power through reason. Build your citadel. Invest in your intellectual and moral life so that your inner world becomes a place you actually want to visit. The man who is a friend to himself is never truly alone. When you master this art, you carry your peace with you into the crowd, knowing that no matter what the world takes away, your inner citadel remains untouched. If you are tired of being a prisoner to distraction and want to build a mind that is its own best companion, start today. Put your phone in another room, set a timer for 10 minutes, and simply exist. Face the silence. Audit the thoughts that arise. Don't forget to subscribe to join our community of modern Stoics. By joining us, you aren't just following a channel, you are committing to a life of mental fortitude and self-sovereignty. What is the hardest part for you about being alone? Let me know in the comments below. Let's build our inner citadels together.